Welcome to the Leopard Spots podcast, presented by Fractional, a leading provider of risk and compliance services to fintechs, banks, and crypto firms. Join the founders, owners, investors, and senior executives as they dive deep into the world of business and entrepreneurship. Trust me, these guys have seen it all, and they're here to share their wisdom with you. So, let's get going. Please welcome your host, Ryan Simo.
Welcome to the Leopard Spots podcast. I am Ryan Simo. I appreciate you joining us again. This is our first in-studio podcast, so I'm looking forward to this. Real quickly, just some quick business. If you get a chance, check us out at Fractional with an X, FRAXTIONAL.co. We are a risk and compliance provider to fintechs, banks, crypto firms, and private equity firms. And I'm really excited today for our next guest, Bob Clerici. Bob and I met, Bob, 12 years ago coaching baseball. And we've stayed connected. And as I got into this podcast, I thought, you know what? Bob's an ideal person to talk to, given your background in entrepreneurship, the stuff that you're doing today, the stuff that you've done before. And so we're going to cover all of it today, but welcome.
Great. Thanks for having me, Ryan.
Absolutely. I appreciate it. Okay. So, I had to take some notes down because as I was going through and knowing what I knew about you, there was things I didn't know about you that I need to, your career trajectory and things that you've done. I think this conversation will be a lot about entrepreneurship, advice, things that you've learned along the way, and it'll be a very free-flowing conversation, but it's interesting. So I did not know this. Your career path includes the following: janitor to welder to machinist, and then civil engineering to aerospace engineering to mechanical engineering, network engineer to technology salesperson to business owner, which we'll get into all this, starting a company, growing it, selling it, which we'll get into, and then consulting to investing in clothing stores, which we'll talk about here. If you're from Buffalo, you'll want to check out Bureau, which we'll talk about in a second. And then also the most recent, running a cocktail lounge, which is a beautiful place on Elmwood Avenue in Buffalo, High Violet. And then private equity to real estate to venture capital. So beyond being an astronaut or something else, you've pretty much covered it all.
Yeah, and you used the word trajectory. There was no trajectory on this.
I was gonna say, I'm not even sure what it is.
Either do I.
So, all right. So let's just jump. Let's go back to when you started. Talk to me about that janitor, machine shop, welder. How did that come about? Like, where did that start? And then we'll jump into that progression into what you're doing now.
Well, I did what most young people do. Is while I'm going to college, at the end of my high school years and into my college years, I needed a job. And I could have went to work for McDonald's or a restaurant or the typical route, but instead I found a machine shop on the east side of Buffalo on Sycamore Street. And at 16 years old on second shift, I went in there and I started to clean up at nights. I'm always looking for okay, that's great. Now, what's next? Like, what else how can I maximize this opportunity here? So then somebody said, hey, do you want to learn how to weld? I said, that'd be cool. Yeah, how do I do that?
Right.
And then I'm a welder. Now, I'm insulting some really good welders out there, but I can kind of lay a bead, okay?
Right.
And then someone said, hey, have you ever run a lathe before, a milling machine? No. You want to learn? Yeah. So I think there's a blend of looking for something else.
Right.
And then people just, if you show an interest, they show an interest in you.
Yep.
And then they teach you. And then you can call yourself a machinist.
So you're a welder and a machinist now, which I didn't know. If I need any help at the house, I'll give you
a lot better people than me.
So, okay, so you're doing that. Then you get into engineering, go to college in engineering, all that stuff. What were you thinking you were going to do when you were in college and then leaving college? Was there a plan in your head?
No, because
no plan.
There's no way a young, especially male, is going to have a plan on anything.
Right.
So I knew that, I was the first generation college. So nobody in my family, uncles, cousins, aunts, nobody really went to college. They went to work for the post office or Delphi Harrison Radiator, General Motors. And I went off and said, hey, you know what? I think I want to go to college. So I went to college. Paid my way through it, came out with an engineering degree, and what do? You go and get a job as an engineer.
Right.
So maybe there was an aspiration to be maybe lead designer someday or maybe head of engineering someday, but 20-something-year-olds don't usually think that far ahead.
So then you get out of college.
Mm-hmm.
At what point did you then start your own company? Let's talk about that. Let's talk about that transition, and then specifically what the company did, because I want to understand your role as an executive of that company that you ultimately sold.
Mm-hmm.
And then we'll talk about things you learned along the way and that sort of thing. But tell us about that.
Great. So it's the late 80s, and I went out and they rolled in my engineering department, they rolled in an IBM AT, 386 AT computer. It was like $6,000. It did nothing. And the engineers kind of like scurried away and said, I don't want to get near that strange box. And I said, sitting there not doing anything. So I kind of like taught myself some basic MS-DOS stuff and WordPerfect for DOS and,
WordPerfect, oh boy.
Easy Calc.
Right.
So then what happened was I made a transition out of engineering because, no offense to engineers, but I'm going to offend them. I like engineering. I typically don't like engineers.
Got it.
And again, it's just a personality thing. I'm kind of like outgoing and want to be in the mix, and they like to sit behind the scenes and get things done. So I got into IT. I got into technology really early in the 90s. And then I worked for a big Fortune 500 firm, publicly traded, that, it was kind of a dead end type of big corporate type of thing. And me and a couple guys did what all guys do, sit around and say, we should start our own thing, right? And then most of the time you don't for lots of good reasons. Right, But what happened to us is that we started to formulate the business and the company and all the learnings that come along with starting a brand new startup. And then mishap ended up being fortune. So the company, Intercom Information Systems, ticker ICO, pink sheeted, and they went out of business. And on June 16th, the year 2000, they were gone. So my non-competes were gone.
Oh, wow.
And I have a whole client base.
Right.
So I was supposed to have like 4 employees by the end of the year. I hired 23 that weekend, and we grew that thing by acquisition and organic 14 years later to almost 200 employees.
And that was based in Buffalo?
That was based in Buffalo. Intergex did managed services, so we outsourced certain functions of IT.
Okay.
And project-based consulting. We wrote Independent Health's first member portal back in the day.
Oh, wow. Wow. So you grew that quickly, obviously.
Well, 14 years.
14 years. But was there a point in time as you were doing it that you had an exit strategy? Hey, look, at some point we'd like to sell this company, or was it something that you wanted to pass down to your kids? Or at what point did you start to say, hey, there's something here where I can potentially sell this, take those proceeds, and then begin to do additional projects, which we'll get into? Talk to me about that.
Sure. So I had a couple partners, and we were sitting in a strategy session about year 12, and my one partner's son had muscular dystrophy, and they knew that there's a limited time there for him. So he says, hey, listen, I want to get out because I want to spend the rest of the years my son has with him. And at the same time, I was the heir apparent to be the new CEO, the new head guy. But I knew that I wanted to go off and do something else. I didn't know what that was, but I knew that this was not what I wanted to do long term. So what we did was we hired an investment banker, and we put the company, we put it up to market, and it eventually sold in 2014.
So not that long, 10 years ago.
10 years, 10 years, almost June 16th.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So 2 out of the 4 guys stayed. That was all part of the plan. I exited, and my other partner exited around the same time.
And then you coached Little League Baseball.
And then I coached Little League Baseball. Yes.
That was the path. All right. So you sell that, and then you must have had a moment of, okay, what am I going to do now? Talk to me about that.
Yeah, and this is where it gets really interesting, because I know a few people that are exiting right now.
Yeah.
And I'm not a big give advice guy, because I think you should listen to almost no one's advice.
Yep.
Okay. Follow your heart, follow your head.
Yep.
But I do tell people, hey, I know you're focused on the transaction. We had to get the ball into the goal. Okay. The problem was that I never thought about what I was going to do next. So what happened is we finally got all eyes on the prize. You get the deal done. Then the Monday morning you hit refresh, the money's sitting there. You're like, whoa. But it's really very anticlimactic. And I know that's hard to believe, but it is. So then I'm like, oh, what am I going to do next? So I bought a house, refurbished a house, moved my family. Well, that's 8-9 months. And now what are you going to do? You play golf. But then what are you going to do next? And I, then started to dabble in different startups, investing money, deploying money, consulting, and realized that I got a lot more in me. And I want to be in the game somehow.
So before we get into how you got into the game or what that game looked like, tell me about, when you were for 14 years in that company that you started with some co-founders. Did you take any learnings from the time on the factory floor or when you were welding that you brought forward into what is a completely different industry, but obviously there was probably things that you learned along the way?
Yeah, I think what I've always had a knack for, and when it goes all the way back to the shop floor, is a couple things, Ryan. One is just ask questions. Most people think that's a form of weakness, like you don't know everything, but it's not. It's actually a form of strength. It's a way of being confident. It's a way of learning, and it's a way of connecting and bonding with whoever's on the other side. It's not what it's not what you know. It's what you ask.
Right.
That really makes those connections. And the second thing is to challenge the status quo. Like, it's just so easy to say this is the way we've always done it. And it just always annoyed me and bored me, quite frankly.
Right.
That we've always done it this way. But can we do it a different way? No, you can't. Why? Oh, you won't do it another way now that you can't do it a different way.
How much do you think, though, that that's a function of the size of the company in some cases?
It could be. Yeah. I think the bigger the companies, the less agility you have, right?
Right.
But I'll even push that down. If you're a midline manager in a big, huge company with 10,000 employees, is there something that you can do to change and disrupt the Pavlov response? Like, is there just something you can do at your level?
Right.
But I did find out that being in control and ultimate control certainly made me more content, certainly made me more creative, and certainly more motivated.
So then you sell the company, you've got your money, you're thinking what's next. And I want to come back to some lessons learned and things of that sort, but just to follow this same trajectory. Then you currently today, now there might be some things in between. Certainly you can help me fill in those gaps if there are, but as we sit here today, you then get into the clothing business. You then get into the cocktail lounge business. And for those folks who are in Buffalo, they're effectively right near each other. They're anyways,
micro campus.
Yeah, almost like a little campus. And I was there when you were doing the build out of the lounge itself. How did that come about? And was there a passion that led you there that, obviously, like that shirt, by the way, I might have to ask you where you got that. I have an inkling of where you got it. Bureau.
Correct.
Yeah. But tell me about that. How did that come about?
Well, this goes back to listening and asking questions. So a good golf friend of mine, Barry, has just opened my eyes to a lot of different things from a business and social. And there's just a lot of things that he adds to the way that I think and behave in a positive way. And Barry came to me, and we were getting into real estate together, and I've built things in the past, not with my hands, but with like contractors. So I know how to run those kinds of projects. Again, just thrown into it, and I figured out how to do it. So he says, hey, do you think we just lost a building on the Lower Niagara side, and it was actually a blessing because I don't know what we were going to do with that building. But anyway, we were sitting there, we just lost the building. He goes, hey, do you think you can build a cocktail lounge? And I'm saying, yeah, I think so. He goes, oh, okay. He goes, well, we're going to build this one in an old house. I'm like, wow, that's interesting. I don't know how that's going to work, but okay. But like, what are you going to do? Like, pay me? He says, no, you're going to be one of the owners.
Okay.
And that was the segue into it. Now, there was a little more conversation about why we're doing it, why we're doing it on Elmwood, why we're using
Right.
an old house.
Right.
But I'm like, you know what? I'm really curious about this project. I'm curious about the team, and I'm curious about the industry. So I said, let's do it.
Now, I mean, that's an interesting leap, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
It's a beautiful place. Let me ask you, that really the fast forward to current, I mean, it's a tough environment to run a business like that.
Mm-hmm.
Not that I don't want to bounce all over, but this is timely. How has that been, since you think about COVID and that entire time?
We built it during COVID.
I remember that. What have you noticed over those last 4 years in terms of, obviously you went from building it to running it now, it's open, but anything that you've taken away, lessons that you've learned from that specific project that you did?
Yeah, I certainly learned the hard way about choosing a good general contractor.
Oh,
Because
right.
I don't think I did. So I learned a lot of what questions to ask,
Yep.
what things to look for. So I think there's a few lessons there from a mechanic standpoint. As far as the hospitality industry, it is a tough industry, but I'll challenge anyone to think, what's an easy industry?
Right. It's true.
Banking easy, right? Is car selling easy? It's all hard, right? So I think that I learned that it's the same P&L as every single business out there.
Right.
There's revenue that comes in, money that's spent, and there's bottom line.
Yeah.
And I think one of the big things that we're trying to challenge in that industry is, can we create a set of technology and process automation that maximizes that P&L? Because what I think that industry has is a lot of leakage in a lot of different ways.
Yeah.
And if you don't understand where your revenue comes from and how you're going to continue that revenue stream, and where every single dollar of cost of goods and expenses go, it is a extremely tough business, because the margins aren't like in software development, for instance.
Sure. Oh yeah. So now let's talk about the clothing side of the house. So we talked about the cocktail lounge. How did that come about?
Yeah,
Now,
that was Barry again.
okay.
So I bought some pieces from Bureau.
Yeah.
Barry was an early investor in them.
Okay.
And Barry says to me, hey, you know what? Can you come in and assess their financial operations?
Right.
They don't have the structure and the rigor yet.
And this was all part of the consulting side of the stuff that you
That was
do
all part
from
of the
your business.
consulting.
Okay. Yep.
So I went in there and I looked around for a few weeks and dug through their financials and met with their CPA and met with the owners, who I got to know pretty well. And I realized, yeah, it's internal controls. It's all process stuff. There's no magic here.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
So I said, hey, listen, I think it's, we can fix it in these ways and everything else. And that's when Barry said again to me, well, wait a second, we can pay you,
Right.
or why don't you just become an owner?
Yeah.
Turn the financials upside down in this thing, and we all get win-win. Plus, you can dress really nice.
Well, that's true. Actually, that's true.
He says, you buy clothes, you wear clothes. Why wouldn't you earn your clothes?
That's very true. And I think you've got some high-profile clients, obviously, at Bureau.
We do.
You do.
We do.
And we'll link to all of this in the show notes. We'll have all the links to Bureau and High Violet.
Great. Thank you.
But
Yeah, certainly a bunch of the Buffalo Bills
Yep.
come in, and all Sean McDermott's road games are us. And
Yep. It's a great Instagram follow, by the way.
it
Bureau
is.
Yeah. Especially when you do the release of what Sean's going to be wearing each week.
Yeah,
For the Bills.
about the time that he's on
Yeah.
the plane.
Yeah.
It took a little bit to coordinate that, and Sean's been great with that. Dawson Knox has done some great stuff with us, and
Yeah, absolutely. The and I love clothes too, so I gotta swing in. Although I'm just wearing corporate merchandise today. But all right, so that's where we are today. So we've kind of set the stage, background. Let's talk about people that are sitting out there today. Let's say they're thinking about entrepreneurship. Let's say they're in a corporate job today. They're thinking about leaving. I think I always say COVID, but it's really the reaction to people being sent home, working from home, really challenged a lot of people to think about what they really wanted to do, and it set the course for people to go and take on different jobs. They became gig workers. They've done side hustles. I mean, it's changed the entire workforce, I think. I can speak personally for myself. I mean, I never had an intent of leaving where I was for 20 some years, But when you start to retrench and you're in your home and you're thinking about, okay, is this really, like if this lasts another 4 or 5 years, 6 years, whatever, do I really want to be doing this? And is there something different I want to do? So I want to talk to you about lessons that you've learned in business and maybe how they've translated over. So, and I had some questions written down here, but when you think about advice that you've received over the years, whether it was when you first started, whether it was 5 years ago or 5 days ago, what's the best advice that you would have for somebody who might be sitting behind a desk today, but want to do something different, want to start their own thing? What do you say to them? Because it's not an easy thing to do.
Yeah. I think I think my advice 20 years, based on my 20 years ago experience, would be completely different. I think it's almost irrelevant today. I think what I'd love to tell everyone is that there's never been a easier, better time to start your own thing. Now, what I mean by that is if you think about the online resources and YouTube and software as a service, and like we were building technology server stacks back then and the complex CRM systems and emails, like the tech alone was a big deal.
Right.
And then how do you incorporate, and you hire an attorney and they incorporate, and what's an operating agreement and what's a seller or a shareholder's agreement? Like there's all this stuff. Well, nowadays, you can have a domain in a matter of minutes. You can have a technology platform in a matter of minutes.
Yep.
You can have Zoom Legal have your contracts in a matter of minutes. Like it is easy. With that, though, is it's never been more crowded than it is today.
That's good.
Because everybody can get into this thing so easy.
And real quick, if I just interject, you're so right, though, about the ease of doing it. I've talked to a couple folks who are making the leap into doing their own things. Talked to them in the last 3-4 months, and I've sat down with them. We've had lunch, we've sat around, and I've said, hey, let me show you the resources that I used. You're 100% right. Everything that you need is a click away, from LLC formation to legal docs to AI generated logos, which this one is, right? I mean, to trademarking, it's incredible. So I just wanted to enunciate that because I think that's really critical for people that are thinking about, well, where do I even start? You could visit 6 websites and have a business up and running, fully functional website, e-commerce, logo, trademarked, and you're off to the races.
There's no doubt.
It's crazy. No, it's a good point. I never thought about that. I never thought about it in the way that you just said it, which I agree with. Yeah, sorry to go ahead.
No, not at all. So it's super easy to get into, but if someone is hesitating, I'd want to ask myself, or I'd want to ask them, hey, what's the hesitation? Hey, it could be, I got a lot of bills at home. Yep. I have a family home. I have a car payment and a house payment.
Yep.
Hey, Bob, you sold a company and, it's easy for you to say. No doubt. Yep. Okay. Yep. But I did start my first one without anything, just what leans on the house. But you're right. Well, nowadays, it's a lot easier.
Yeah.
But here's my point, is if you had that much hesitation, then maybe you shouldn't do it. I'd love to see everybody go out in there and make their own mark and hang their own shingle, but it is not for everybody.
It's not. Let me ask you this, though. So when you think about the industries that you've been in, you've been in a lot of them, right? As an owner, operator. Is there, and maybe there's an industry that you're not in that you think, maybe I want to be in that industry. Have you thought about, is there another industry that you'd like to be in? Based on the current circumstances, the way things are going today, like you said, the advice you got 20 years ago wouldn't be the same today. Maybe 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago, there's an industry that you wouldn't have gotten into that maybe you'd get in today. Have you ever thought about that?
I have thought about it. Okay. But I'm about 0 for 23 of predicting industries, tech platforms. I mean, Uber is the dumbest idea I ever heard. Selling YouTube for $1 billion was stupid. I mean, I have all I missed them all. Yeah. So the point is that I'm more about an opportunistic. Yep. Like, if something comes by and it's interesting and I feel that I can stay interested, make an impact, and slide into something new, I'm super excited. But I'm not out there thinking about what's the next best thing.
Is there a piece of advice that you got over the years that you found to be most useful, or most helpful in your career? That you'd share?
Yeah. Progress versus perfection.
Progress versus perfection.
So here's the deal. You're sitting around your kitchen table and you're going to start your own business. And you do all your Googling and you do all your YouTubing and you do all your software and you just continually, fester on, is it going to be, which CRM system am I going to use? And should I use Google or Exchange? And what about my clients? And like, there's a way to become paralyzed if you're looking for perfection. So I say, hang the thing up, get a domain going, make 2 phone calls, and call it a day until tomorrow. Yep. Like progress versus perfection is some of the best advice I got. As a perfectionist, I want everything to be perfect.
Right.
But you get paralyzed by that behavior.
So on the other side of that, though, is there advice that you were given at some point in time that maybe you didn't take, that in retrospect, you should have taken? Something that, maybe you missed on an opportunity because you didn't follow somebody's, advice on something, or was it just more so, was there management advice you were given or business owner advice you were given that you didn't take that you probably should have taken?
I'm sure there was.
Yeah.
But one thing that I have, which I think is a gift, is I rarely look back at, especially in business and investment decisions, and second guess those, because I typically have as much information as I'm going to have to make a decision.
Right.
And I make the best decision at the time, and I'm wrong a lot. So I'm accepting of that. But I think some of the best, early on, we hired an attorney and a CPA or an accountant on the cheap.
Yeah.
And everyone does it because there's not a lot of money.
And they're really hard to find, to be honest with you.
Good ones are hard to find.
Good ones are hard to find, yeah.
And they're hard to afford.
Yes, yeah.
But in the long run, it's advice I wish I would have took, is to go find a really good attorney, and typically they're more than you can spend, and a really good CPA or CPA firm. That's typically more than you can afford. And I know that sounds boring because it's like back office, legal and accounting, but
it's so true. Somebody asked me a couple weeks ago about an accountant, and they said, "Hey, do you use?" I said, "Well, I use so-and-so." And I said, "But here's the thing." I said, they have a wait list. They're not bringing on new clients. And so, it's one of those things where until you get into, let's say, running your own business and you're trying to find an accountant who does, business type stuff, and then you realize like, oh, wow, there's not a lot of these folks out there. And so I agree with you, because you can easily go to somebody, you were talking about websites you can go to do things to start your business. There's a lot of these gig websites where, hey, I need somebody to design this, or I need an accountant, or I need this. You can find them. You just don't know what you're going to get.
You don't. And then there's also I think there's a big difference, Ryan, between advice and knowledge.
Right.
So I'll give you an example.
Yeah.
If someone says, hey, this is the difference between cash and accrual accounting. It's knowledge. I want to learn from that. And I want lots of people giving me lots of learning. Teach me about this, teach me about that. Teach me how to lever money. Teach me how to hire. Advice is different. Advice usually doesn't have any skin in the game. Advice is, well, you should have done this, you should do this, you should do that. We just had someone came over to our house that has a new baby, and they said, hey, do you have any advice? I said, yeah, I always have the same advice for all newborn parents or newly parents. Don't listen to anyone's advice. Because it's easy, it's cheap, and it's worthless. Hey, Ryan, you should have done this, you should do this, you should do this.
Right.
I'd rather say, hey, you know what we did is in the middle of the night when that baby's crying, we went to what to expect when you're 1 year old, and I looked at it's only 3 things.
Yeah.
They have a diaper, they're hungry, or they're thirsty.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's knowledge. And I think what a lot of people do is they confuse both the recipient and the giver, confuses the two. I'll teach anybody how to read financials. That's different than giving advice. Because we never know everything that the recipient knows about their business or their situation. And sometimes you can just follow advice until you're out of business.
Well, that was going to be my next question to you. When you think about the businesses that you've been involved with, and you don't have to say which one it would be if you have an affirmative answer to it, but have you ever woken up at night saying, I don't think this thing's going to work? Talk to me about that. and I say talk to me about that wherever that conversation takes us. But because I think look, there's a big difference between a W-2 employee or receiving a W-2 as a paycheck for a company, and then you running your own payroll for yourself. It's very different. I mean, it's very different. If you've had that moment, walk me through how you've dealt with that. So I think a lot of people who've started their own business or are starting it are going to eventually encounter it.
Yeah, I think you're going to encounter that almost every time.
It's frequent.
Most times.
Yeah.
Because the story is that if you're really selling a lot, most companies go out of business because of cash flow, not because of top line revenue. So there's a difference. Yeah. So you just learn these little things over time. But the point is that I think that most companies, most first-time business or second-time business owner, third-time business owners in a startup situation and early in the maturity curve, wake up in the middle of the night and go, I'm not sure this is going to work. And I think there's two paths to take. One of them is to challenge yourself to figure out, well, why isn't it going to work? And is it something that can be fixed?
Right.
And the second path is that I've convinced myself it's not going to work. Let's end it.
Right.
Because sunk cost fallacy will make more people go bankrupt than anything else. We know the model doesn't work. We know we're not going to be able to pull this thing out of a tailspin. But because of things like ego, pride, avoidance,
sure,
we hang in there and we shovel money in. And it goes up in flames, and we shovel money in and it goes up in flames. So doesn't mean that they all are going to do that, but you got to really challenge yourself of why isn't this model working? What should I be different? What can I try different? With the expectation there's going to be different results. And if there isn't, and you've exhausted most or all the ideas, so I've been fortunate. I've only had to wind down 2.
Okay.
And they never really took any traction. And that's one of the reasons they got wound down.
You and I have talked over lunch in the past couple months, and I want to get to this, which is, let's say the company that you sold back in 2014, but from 2000 to 2014, you had the company. Let's say that 10-year period started in 2014. Right? And then you had to ride through all the ups and downs of the last 10 years. Do you think the outcome would have been any different? Obviously the type of people you hire generationally have changed, even in that 10-year period. I'm fascinated by that, to know you as a business owner who had that company from 2000, the really heady days of 2000 to 2014, where you almost avoided, outside of the 07, 08 credit crisis, whatnot. It's almost like you were fortunate enough to avoid some of the other things that have happened subsequent to that. What do you think about that? Would it have been different? I mean, I know it's a crystal ball, but do you think it would have been materially different?
Yeah. So by the way, there's always something.
Yeah.
Right? There's always something.
Always.
Every generation, every decade, every year has something. Okay. So I think that what the obstacles were going to be were just going to be different, but there was always going to be something. But I'll tell you what is interesting. My business model from 2000 would not be, it's irrelevant in 2014.
Just completely different.
It's gone. Nobody does what I did.
Let me ask you this, though, just to that point.
Yeah.
From a product basis, it's different. Let's say, though, the 200 people that you employed, I assume they were in the office.
They were.
They were. Okay. Fast forward to today, there are still, being in an office is, I still think, in the minority of what people are doing. I think most people are still remote. Yeah, companies are calling people back and doing those things, but how would you have dealt with that? Because I'm fascinated by this. Obviously for me, I work at home or at client sites and whatnot now, but I am still fascinated that you've got very large employers in cities that haven't really called people back into the office, or they've done it kind of tangentially, like a couple days here, there. To the point where I think it's baked into the cake. I don't know how you ever call anybody back 5 days a week, let alone a predefined number of days. How would you have dealt with that as a business owner of the company that you had? Obviously retail, hospitality, all that's different, but how would you have dealt with that? And what are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, so I think the honest answer of how I would have dealt with it is I don't know, because it was just foreign to us back then. Now, salespeople were typically remote.
Sure.
And we had, 3 software developers across the country that we wanted to retain and keep on, and they moved and they stayed with us. But 97% of our people were on site. So, it was just such a foreign concept to put myself back in time. It's really hard to know how I would have responded to that. But I can tell you my opinion of it is it's really interesting to see what the fallout is going to be. And maybe there's more upside than downside. I don't want to be negative. But there's a few things that we all know about. Productivity is one of them. Like, I know most people make an argument they can work a lot more productive at home. I think that's a big lie to themselves and everybody else, but
oh, you do? Okay.
I understand.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I do. I think that there's a lot of distractions at work. I think there's more distractions at home.
Yeah.
But young people especially, and even me at my old age now, I still work all the time, all hours of the night, not all the time, but I have a very flexible schedule. So maybe there's some productivity gains there because nights and weekends are all in play now. We're in the office that wouldn't have been. Or on the road or on vacation. So people are more connected. So I'm talking myself in a full circle. But then you got this culture thing. Like, how do you create, like the venture capital firm I work for now, HC9, they're in the health tech space, and we're all virtual. The GPs, I'm their chief of staff, everyone else is virtual, different cities. And it's hard as a new person, I started there in October, to make an impact, to communicate, to understand, to create a bond, to create a relationship, a working relationship. So that's why it's really hard for me to go back in time, because it was easy. Someone comes on, they go to lunch, everyone sits around the water cooler, the coffee. There was a way of getting to know people.
Yeah.
And now the Zoom calls just aren't the way to do it. And then I hear, no, we don't do it. Ours are video 100%. But I know that a lot of companies have audio-only Zoom calls. So now you've even disconnected one more layer of this.
Oh, yeah.
So without sounding like a guy that, an older guy that says, oh, this is never going to work, I'm interested to see how much creativity, productivity, flexibility brings along.
Mm-hmm. And, back to the point around you made where you're chief of staff now and you're working with this company, I would assume a lot of that was, like you said earlier, like you said, you refresh your phone, you say, okay, I got paid for the company I sold, but hey, I want to keep doing stuff. And even though you've got High Violet that you own and operate, you've got Bureau Made that you own and operate, you still had more that you wanted to do. And so you got involved with this company.
That is true. So what I was missing, and we do some real estate and some other things, and there's some private equity money I've deployed. But one thing that I was missing was something that had either scale, complexity, or another payday, like something that has some kind of bang to it. And I wasn't sure it was going to be the venture capital world. I certainly dabbled around the private equity world before. I could go work for a big company, but I'm looking for that I can make an impact, that I can move the needle, that I can make, create some clarity and complexity and scale. And then with that, I hope I get some kind of pop at the end of that, because I think that would be really fun and satisfying. So I had to find the right opportunity to be able to do that.
Well, I think so many people think, oh, geez, if I exited a company, I would just, I'd get a yacht, I'd go to Ibiza, and I'd golf and do everything. But like you said, and obviously it's playing out, there's still that intellectual curiosity, there's still that drive to, hey, I still have a lot to give. I want to give. And that's really what you've done. If you were to go back 25 years or so and think about the single biggest thing, and you talked a little bit about this, but single biggest thing you've learned that maybe has been most consistent over your career that you've taken with you. And maybe there's something, maybe there's a hobby or something that you've done that you've taken lessons from and you've carried that forward. What's that overarching, I don't want to say piece of advice, but the overarching guiding principle that you've picked up on from wherever you've picked up on it, that you've carried with you through all these various disciplines? And
So there's two. There's one I didn't do and there's one I did. The one I didn't do is max out your 401k.
The best advice ever.
That's it.
I mean, yeah, 100%.
Okay.
They should tell kids that in school more so than they do. You know, at home, I'm always, the day you can do it, you do it. I'm right with you on that.
There's no doubt.
Yeah.
But the thing that I think one of my, superpowers is ability to network and create relationships. And there's almost no place to do that better than the golf course. So my hobby, passion has been golf for many, many years. My family's into golf. My kid's a good golfer.
Very good golfer.
And the amount of relationships that I've started, kindled, and fostered over the years on a golf course is just I think it's a unique place.
Mm-hmm.
Back when I was a frontline salesperson selling and I wanted to get my biggest and best clients in a meeting, I can't get like 45 minutes with them. They're too busy. But I invite them to a golf outing and I get 4 to 6 hours with them.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's true. Yeah, that's absolutely true. I mean, I got my kids lessons when they could have lessons, and and my son will dabble in it now. I mean, he's serviceable, right? Because you don't know. You go get a job, and somebody says, "Hey, come golf with us," and you don't want to look like you've never swung a club before. Same with my daughter, and I totally agree with that. Like when I golf with you, the problem is I'm usually kind of in the woods. You're in the fairway, so we don't even get a chance to talk until we meet back up in the cart. But you're right. That's a good point. Let me ask you this as we kind of get towards the end of this, and that is when you think about 10, 15, 20 years from now, right? Our kids are roughly the same age. And when you think about their future, specifically in what industries are existing, AI is obviously an overused term, but it's real. I mean, it's a game changer. And what do you think the next 10, 15, 20 years looks like? Are they going to be able to do, or are my kids going to be able to do what you're like, this entrepreneurship, going into various businesses? I mean, that'll always exist, but it's going to look a lot different, I would suspect. Custom clothing, for example, right, which Bureau does. The phone will probably, and they do it now.
They do it now.
Scan you and pump out some sort of AI vision of what it is that this thing should look like, and they can ship you your clothes. What do you think about 10, 15, 20 years now? And what advice would you give your kids now that they're going to think and sit here in a podcast 15, 20 years from now and say, oh, this is the best advice I've ever gotten?
Yeah. So back to my 0-23 for predicting the future. I don't know if I can do that, but I can tell you one thing. And if I think about, just the winding path I took here, my best advice for my kids is expose yourself to as much as you can. Volunteer for everything. And that doesn't mean just community service. I mean, just at work or whatever, just volunteer. And on top of that, just continually find a way to add value. So one thing that no one can take, AI can't take this from you, and robotics can't take this from you, and that is the intellectual capital you accumulated with tenure. And that's the one thing. I'm new to VC, and I've been reminded more than once that, hey, you're not VC. You're right, I'm not. But I've done a lot of other things that fall in the VC space, from startup to being a founder, to being an operational leader, to doing a transaction 2 or 3. So if carry with you like a pride, a badge of honor, or a briefcase full of all the different perspectives, experiences, and knowledge. It's not about how to code, because once you're a coder, you can use any coding software out there. You don't care that they went from this platform to this platform to this platform. You're a coder. And if you're a business person, a finance person, an attorney, as long as you're adding value. Now, there's a lot of jobs that AI is going to threaten. And I'm not going to call any of them out because I've already insulted enough people in the last 45 minutes. But if you are a transactional, public domain, public knowledge pushing of paper, that is a bad place to be, because there's not enough value add in that supply chain as there used to be. So I'd be starting to look ahead and go, okay, I don't know exactly where I'm going to play, but I've learned a lot in my years. What can I do now to stay on the ahead and continually add value? How do I apply knowledge, not just use knowledge to push the paper from step A to step B.
Mm-hmm. It's so true. And I would just say this, just from my own personal experience, your point around, being inquisitive, volunteering, if you will. I think a lot of times in corporate America, you're voluntold to do certain things. And some people, my entire career was effectively being voluntold stuff. And I thrived on it. I loved it. I loved being, hey, go do this or go do this and we'll figure it out later, and really enjoyed doing that. And I think that, for me personally, to go from sales for 10 years into offshoring for a couple of years, into compliance then for years. And, it's anytime I tell people my background, anytime I tell people my background, they always say like, that's a strange path, which is why I wanted to sit down with you, because your path is equally as strange in a good way.
No doubt. Is
that you can weave your way through all different disciplines, but there's probably 80% of everything's the same in the sense that there's nothing that's going to be so outrageously different that you can't figure it out unless it's a highly technical job. And so I think your advice is spot on.
And that's the figure it out factor.
That's right. Yeah, okay. You figure it out. Yep.
If you can, so what does a chief of staff do? Right. For a company.
Sure.
Right. There's three kinds of chief of staffs out there. There's the medical chief of staff. That's not me. Okay. Yep. There's the political chief of staff.
Yep.
Not me either.
Yep.
But the corporate chief of staff is the figure it out guy.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
Everything I've done for HC9, not everything, 80% of what I've done, I've never done before. Right. I've never done AML, anti-money laundering, and know your customer.
Yeah.
I've never done that before.
Sure, yeah.
But you go out and you figure it out.
Yeah.
And I think that is the part in the DNA that young people or people looking to make a transition should focus on is, am I a figure it out, guy, person?
Absolutely.
I help a few ex-professional athletes transition. And they're always like, well, I only know football. And I challenge them every time. No, you don't always know. You don't only know football. Sure. There's a whole bunch of things you know. You know self-discipline. You're a self-starter. You're a good communicator. You understand the aspects of team. You memorize plays. I mean, there's just so much that a football player does on and off the field since they were 6 years old. Can you take that, transfer that knowledge, and be a figure-it-out person?
Yeah. No, I totally agree with you. I have one final question for you. Well, two final questions actually. Any inside information on the Bills season coming up from Sean? I know you're friends with Sean. Any good scoop?
I think Sean and I are friendly because we don't talk football.
I was gonna say. So, my last question for you, and seriously, is when you think about business, entrepreneurship specifically, and you think about, we talked about earlier, people, like I said, I've talked to people who are always thinking about it, but they may not do it. If you had to say, and you said it's probably the best time to do it now than any other time to do it. But if you were to kind of take a step back and say, okay, if I were going to do something today, I was going to start today, how much of a run up do you give yourself before you start? And I guess the better way to ask it is this. There's probably no great time or bad time to start something, but do you think look, you got to think about this for 6 months, for 12 months. You don't just quit one day and say, I'm going to go into this thing. There's got to be some period of time that you think makes the most sense to say you need to get yourself situated. It's all individual situations, obviously, but is your advice to people, look, take 6 months, put a plan together. Don't just jump. Look at your network. Do some stuff behind the scenes while you're working. Like, what's your advice for people that want to do that?
I think it's somewhere in between 0 to 6 months. In other words, without being unprofessional and unethical to your current employer, right? Outside of the working hours and the commitments and contracts and relationships that you have with whatever you're doing. I think what you do is you spend, a relatively short amount of time. I'll just pick some arbitrary numbers. A month or two, once you have the idea of just getting a few things in place. We talked about a little bit of legal, a little bit of accounting, a little bit of contracts. So what does a proposal look like? What does the website look like? And when you got a little bit of a brand, and I mean very light in all those areas.
Sure.
And then what you need is one customer. Not paying customer.
Totally.
One customer.
Totally. Yep.
Okay.
That's great
So you
advice.
go and you find who is willing. And now there's two ways to do that. You can bluff and just go, hey, this is what I do, and I do it for all these customers. I always took the approach, you're my first. And because of that, if you're willing and you're tolerant and you have the stomach, I would like to do it with you. And in return, I'm going to break my neck for you to get it done and get it done on time and learn along the way. You can learn along the way, and we're going to have a great relationship. And it's not going to cost you a thing other than time. Yep. And I know that time is money, and I will be respectful of that time, but I'd like to do this, beta project with you. And then once you have one name, one logo, one referenceable, you are now officially in business, Ryan.
We hadn't talked about this, obviously, previous to this. You literally just took the words out of my mouth. I've talked to people that are in the process of going to do this now. That's why I asked the question, because I know they're going to watch and I know they're going to listen. And you literally just said very much the same thing I've said, that you get logos on a page. And if that takes you doing stuff gratis to do it, and to show that you can A, do the work, and B, that they trust you. And that's how you build it. Right. And so like you said, you jump into it, you get into it, and then you start to realize that you're not going to get paid outrageous amounts of money out of the gate, maybe ever. But you've proven that you can do it. You have clients, you're in business now.
That's it.
I love that advice. No, that's perfect. That's perfect. Bob, I appreciate you joining today.
Sure.
This was great. Really appreciate the advice, the career journey. You and I have known each other for 12 years. There's parts of this that I did not know, the welding, all that stuff. I had no idea, but I'll call you if I need something done at the house.
Okay.
But I really appreciate the advice and your enthusiasm for the work that you're doing, which is great. And so for folks that are in Buffalo, obviously we'll link to all the places that you've got. But for folks outside of Buffalo, does Bureau sell online outside of?
Yeah, they don't.
Okay.
Now it's really interesting because we are testing.
Okay, well,
the AI generated camera platform you're talking about that can take head to toe measurements.
Okay.
And then we can pump that into the system and then send that off to our tailors to build it. We're not there yet.
Okay.
But typically what happens is someone comes into town, like even some of these athletes, they come into town, we get one good set of measurements from them, and then going forward, it's pretty easy unless there's some, big fluctuation in size.
Yep. Okay.
But typically almost all of our business is local and has to be done on-prem for now.
Okay. And you're not shipping custom cocktails?
We are not doing that. Well, New York State doesn't let us do that.
Unfortunately. There's a revenue avenue coming down the pipe. Maybe they'll change that. But thanks so much for joining us. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Ryan.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Leopard Spots podcast. If you liked what you heard, then be sure to like, subscribe, leave a rating, and visit our website at fractional.co. As a founder, a senior leader at Fortune 500 companies, and executive at high-growth fintechs, Ryan loves to talk business and share these stories with you. That's all for now, folks. Catch you next time on the Leopard Spots podcast.